I want to know how I'm going to make money. And so I want to give you the opportunity to touch on trigger points.
It's a very easy way to own the upside of the most strategic deposits the world is going to need.
What I love to do is introduce the right people to the right people.
I assemble the smartest people I can think of or reach out to carry that conversation, and that's exactly what I've done today.
Please give my panel a round of applause. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jay Martin. I am an investor and the CEO of Cambridge House International. Now, everything I do on this channel is done in the pursuit of improving my portfolio. Today, we're looking at the renewable energy sector. Let's do it. Okay, my next guest is Alex Sukernick, the CEO of NOVR Royalty, a royalty company focused on the copper and nickel business.
What's up, guys? Jay Martin here, CEO of Cambridge House, and I am now joined by Alex Sukernick, CEO of NOVR Royalty. Alex, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Always great to be here, Jay.
Good. I'm excited to catch up with you again. Right now we're taking a hard look at the renewable space. I've become very bullish, and I've decided that the best way to play this market, for me anyways, is to look at what I believe to be the most sustainable and predictable commodities / ingredients fueling this. That lands me at copper and nickel, which is why I like NOVR Royalty so much. Before we get into Nova, and I'd like to get an update on the story since the last time I had you on, but I want to touch on broad market renewable energy first, Alex, because I know that was your inspiration to launch Nova. Now, there's a number of factors you could point to that are driving an appreciating copper price, and renewables is probably my top pick. From your standpoint, Alex, do you ever get pushback though? Because I know you're very bullish on renewables, right? As am I, but timing is more of a question mark in my mind. So do you ever get pushback from prospective shareholders who say, yes, you're right to be bullish on renewables, but I still think you're 10 years too early?
Look, it's a good question. Yeah, we're not so much bullish on renewables. We simply see renewables as the main power source for the world going forward. So I suppose that qualifies as bullish, but I always think of bullish as sort of a temporary view. I'm bullish today, I'm bearish tomorrow. Like we saw something so strong and fundamental happening, before we started Nova, that we decided to really focus on this, and I was to devote, in my case, 100% of my time on this. So it's something where, what we see right now is a car will simply be electric, in the not too distant future. What we see as the grid and power to heat our homes and businesses and the like will be done via dominantly renewables, which is wind and solar. And so I think very few people I think we've met feel like this is not something that's going to be important. But I would say also very few people we've met really see the extent to which we think it's going to. So I think we're still very early days, and the adoption cycle, wind and solar account for 4% of US energy.
Okay.
That's a super small number. So although a fair amount of money has been invested, I think, at least in nominal terms, we're still at the baby stage, relatively speaking, in terms of where this is. So we see this just becoming mainstream.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment you made about those two separations. You can be bullish on renewables, but still not really understand the full spectrum mainstream adoption and what that means. And to that point, the majority of copper forecasts I see seem to reference the same thing: Tesla's sedan production. And that's kind of where it ends, right? When they talk about forecasting copper demand, right? It's relatable, we can wrap our minds around that. But yes, it's like a percent of what it means to electrify the planet. It's hard to wrap your mind around because my entire life, it's been the petrodollar. Oil has been the most important commodity on the planet. It's an important commodity today. It's going to be important for the rest of my life. Doesn't make it a growth industry. And so I guess when you look at renewable progress, Alex, what countries are leading the way right now?
I think maybe before I answer that question, there's a very tempting thing to think of renewables and electric energy as an economic movement. But that's not what we saw in 2017, 2018, when we're putting NOVA together. It's a change in sentiment and change in values that is, I think, emotional more than anything else. And I think it's a realization among a critical part of the population that it's climate related, it's environment related, it's a lot of things related, that we simply cannot continue the way we were. And I think you're seeing this across the board around the world, whether that's the Paris Agreement, whether that's China, which is arguably the leader in renewable energy, India, it's everywhere. So, we're in the middle of a change in values, I think, in terms of how people want to live and what kind of, how they want to use the resources of the planet going forward. And that's manifesting itself in wind and solar. So I really do think that this is not something that's just a purely economic idea. I grew up, born actually in the former Soviet Union. And, I was 11 when we left just before the whole thing cratered. And what you saw there was a change in values. People just didn't want to do this anymore. And it collapsed from within. And what I see here is similar. People don't want to live the way they've lived. They want to live differently. So the idea of fossil fuels, I see a lot of these forecasts. So substitution is not going to be as quick as you think. We don't know how quick it's going to be, but the idea that it's not going to happen, I think we're past that. So you're in the middle of fundamental change, and the world has reached this no mas moment. They just don't want to do this anymore, and you see it in every country at this point. And you see it not just in people in the streets or newspapers, you see it at the government levels. You see it in the Chinese Communist Party. You see it in the United States. You see it in Europe. You see it everywhere. So we're in for a very, very long haul here in terms of the whole thing changing.
Right. Okay. Now, that actually reminds me when I don't know if this is when you received, call it the inspiration to start NOVA. You were at a conference. You were listening to representatives from the Chinese government talk about commodities they were after a decade earlier versus what they're after today. And was that the spark? And maybe recap that for us and then follow up. Was that the spark that made you decide NOVA's got to go right now?
Well, the thing is, it was building kind of, I saw things happening, in terms of people talking about green energy and green demand and the like. And, but I've never been the person that sort of jumps on something on the so-called new thing. That's completely just contrary to how I've done everything. But what I saw kind of when that gentleman from the Chinese government did come up on the stage, I saw that what was happening sort of as a thought or an idea had now made its way into primary policy of, in general, what's been a very conservative, thoughtful body, which is the Chinese Communist Party. And so I think there was, what I saw was that this is something that was becoming a tool of people that are generally rational. And so at that point, kind of that shift was beginning to really make sense in my head. So we didn't want to start NOVA to be sort of a topical company. We wanted to start a company that would be really a mainstream company for what was happening. And if you look at what we've bought so far, we've bought really royalties in some of the most prominent nickel development projects in the world. We didn't want to be just sort of riding the leverage game. We wanted to buy the best things possible. So we really saw and see a wholesale substitution. And I think that, that conference probably helped in the formation of that process, but it was happening long before, to be honest.
Right. Okay. Now, NOVA, so, copper nickel royalty play, you're purchasing third-party royalties, focusing on the biggest projects. Right now, you kind of got the first mover advantage. I expect that to change, right? If you look at the abundance of companies in the gold, silver space.
No doubt.
There's probably a number of business models hot on your tail. How soon do you think that landscape will change, and how is NOVA going to stay competitive when you have competitors?
Listen, whether you have competitors, whether you don't, it doesn't really matter. Everything comes down to how thoroughly do you think about your business? How do you evaluate quality, how to evaluate risk, and whether you give people, I think when you transact with the royalty owner, especially since because we've been successful even at the early stage, getting people to take shares in the company. It's how much can you convince them to really be a part of the company for the future, because that's on the management team and how it thinks about its business and the value it can create and the like. You know, we've been very successful so far. I think for our shareholders, I think investors from our first round are up about 10 times or something like that. And I think we just, you know, we don't just jump into things. You know, if you look at what we've bought so far, it's been very targeted. You know, every project we've bought in 2020, which has really been, I think, our year of growth, it's been owned by a major operator. I think we had very good pricing discipline in terms of kind of what makes sense and what doesn't. And I expect that in the future, you know, people will want to be a part of the story. I think you know, we built a company, I think, that will be here for the long haul. You know, we expect to be a part of this copper and nickel space for a very long time. So, you know, we're really excited to be here. You know, will there be competitors? Will pricing get aggressive in some cases? Sure. Well, in that case, you probably just have to walk away if you feel that something doesn't make sense for you, or, you know, if it's something that you really want, you know, you figure out how to be flexible and get it done, but in ways that really make sense to you. I mean, nothing is worth going crazy and losing your discipline for. But in every industry, if you look at all successful companies, they all go through these stages. If you have the first mover, you know, maybe you go a little faster in the beginning, then people come in, maybe you have to be a bit more careful. Then these people inevitably come out because they overreached, and then the playing field is open again. So I think you just kind of try to figure out where the wins are and kind of do the best you can, but nothing really changes for us, to be honest.
It's, you know, that's been like the underlying style that I've noticed with you since we met. You know, when I ask you questions like, Alex, what can shareholders expect in the next 12 months? You kind of throw your hands up and say, I'm not worried about 12 months. We're talking decades here. You're a very long-term thinker. I've noticed that about you. Not to say you're not worried about what's happening next quarter and the following quarter, but I have noticed you take a very high-level vision to Nova. But Alex, for anybody who hasn't watched, you know, our previous interview or I do want to just open the door on the business model a little bit. If you purchase a share in Nova Royalty, what are you purchasing?
I think, listen, more than anything, you're buying the management team. You know, and because like we started this company, you know, after their first capital raise, you know, we raised $2.6 million and we spent $2 million in cash for our first acquisition, which was a Dumont royalty. So we did like $600,000 or so. And, you know, we really did our work on the universe and figured out what are the logical next steps to build the company we wanted to build. And I think you saw the results manifested in 2020, which I think has been a really exciting year of growth. And I think now it's a really unique portfolio of assets, because when you look at what we have so far, you know, there's not a lot of development projects that are being pushed forward by major companies. You know, so we have Taka, which is really First Quantum's next major priority. Once the company is delivered, then Cobre Panama is fully built. We have Nova Union, which is Teck Newmont's major priority once Teck finishes Quebrada Blanca. And we have Twin Metals, which is Antofagasta's main project outside of Chile. We have Janice Lake, which is Rio Tinto's arguably most aggressive project in North America right now on the exploration side. And we have our initial acquisition, the Dumont project, which is the second largest nickel reserve in the world. And I think given that everything that's happening with nickel demand, I don't think there's a more advanced nickel project in North America right now. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we've been, I think, very thoughtful about what we've bought. And I think we understand how this fits into the overall space. Right now, an investor cannot get exposure to this part of the world through, I think, any other vehicle like this, because we have no risk remaining. We have no more capital commitments, you know, kind of once we acquire the royalties. So you get perpetual benefits from some of the most important ore bodies in these segments, run by serious people who have the capital and the expertise to actually make it work. And we're going to keep growing the company with the same focus. So I think more than anything, they really get kind of the team and kind of how responsibly it approaches its business and kind of where it fits in. And I think the asset portfolio, just from what we've done to date, is really unique. You know, because there's a handful of development projects out there that are actually on their way. what we've spent a lot of time thinking about, working through and thinking about, and I think we want to educate people on now, is the so-called copper pipeline is not a pipeline in the same way you think about in terms of gold or any other commodity where it's quicker. The things that are currently being advanced are 5-7 year timeframes. Things that are not yet on the board, I mean, we're talking decades.
Yeah.
So if you want to get exposure to sort of really the best projects, there's not a ton of them. And especially in one vehicle, which is focused and dedicated to this thesis. So I do think it's already a very, very cool and unique portfolio that we have. And look, we've got a lot more happening right now. So we'd love to add more to it in a way that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you referenced some of the biggest names: First Quantum, Tech Newmont, Antofagasta, Rio Tinto. For anybody, Alex, who's not familiar with the royalty space, just dive into one of these for a little bit and walk us through the details. What are you receiving from Rio Tinto?
Well, Rio Tinto, kind of in that case, we bought an exploration project. We don't usually buy exploration royalties, but there are situations where it does make sense. And this was one of those unique cases where you have a major company which is very hungry for copper. If you see, Rio's entire focus at this point has shifted to copper. They have a project in Australia called Winu, which is a new discovery, and they just discovered a couple of years ago. Now they're talking about putting into production, and this will be the smallest mine they've ever put into production, really as a first shot, just because they're so eager to get something going in the commodity. And then in Janice Lake, we saw something that could potentially fit the same thesis. This is Saskatchewan, very mining-friendly jurisdiction, broad in the infrastructure, big camp. It's over 50 kilometers. And Rio systematically going literally kilometer by kilometer in mapping, sampling, drilling. So they've already done, before we bought it, they had done one drilling campaign, which was 2019. And they uncovered several large zones of mineralization. So your mineralization was already 8 kilometers long in terms of strike length. So we thought to ourselves, well, look, if this is what's happening, and they followed that up, they built a big camp, 50-person camp, and it looks like they're in it for a couple of years, judging by their actions so far. We thought, this is something that continues going that in the way that it could be truly a rare special asset, because if it's something in a developed market with such a big mineralization scope and a large company, this is one of those assets could become the next major mine. So when we see something like that, we absolutely get very focused in seeing what is the reasonable way to bring it in the portfolio. And then we we spoke with a prospect generator who had the royalty, which was Transition Metals, and we did what I think was a very good deal for both of us. We picked up half of the royalty position, and for a combination of cash and shares, so they got a chance to monetize some of their prior work through us. And they're obviously very liquidity sensitive, but they also wanted to ride the upside of what Nova was doing. So they took a meaningful share position, which has done very well for them. And and then we have a right of first refusal on the remaining part of the royalty, which they hold. So once in a while we go into situations like this, which have a chance to be something unique and special. More often than not, we'll go after things like what we did with Taka, which is First Quantum's asset in Argentina. Now, Taka has already got, the resource, I think, is over 13 million tons. And they just came up, and that was when 13 million tons of copper, which would make it one of the larger copper inventories in the world. It's located actually in the same trend as Escondida, which is the world's biggest copper mine. So Taka is located 90 kilometers east, just across the border from Chile. Same geological trend, same region, effectively. And when you Google Taka, it makes your due diligence a little bit simpler. It's just if you Google the Great Taka project, you'll come up, because it's just an absolutely massive amount of metal, and it's not even done growing. So when we bought it, the theory was that there wasn't much happening at the project because First Quantum was busy. But I mean, our view on this was, how can a project this big be ignored? It just doesn't make sense. And they already bought it. And then just by sheer chance, our acquisition closed on a Friday, on November 27th. We put out a press release November 30th that we had closed it. That same morning, Jay, First Quantum put out their maiden reserve in Taka with a timeline for a production decision 2023, 2020. So it's one of those things when you understand what you're looking for and you understand what the source of value in this business, sometimes you get lucky this way, where sometimes things coincide. But I think the view we took was that the project was so strong technically. It's in a great place in Argentina, in Salta province, arguably the best place in Argentina for a mining company. They understand mining. They understand the industry, the process. So definitely not kind of what I think people often associate with Argentina, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so I think we were really excited when we got it, and then obviously we got some good news. So now there's at least some reasonable pathway to this thing producing, and once it produces, it's going to probably go into the 22nd century, more likely than not.
Okay.
Because these.
Yeah, that actually leads into I want to think forward with you a little bit, Alex, and I want you to speak to the retail shareholder or prospective shareholder for a second here. I understand how the retail investor mind works because I am one. I want to know how I'm going to make money, and so I want to give you the opportunity to touch on trigger points within Nova Royalty. For an investor that purchases today, what are the trigger points that we could look forward to that's going to create that rise in appreciation in share price for us?
Well, look, here's kind of how we think about a business, and I think I trust the intelligence of the audience here. When we buy these royalties and big assets, you're not paying for all the value that will come forward in the future, because these things always expand. The most beautiful thing about these royalties, these assets, is they're so large, they always grow a lot bigger over time. So, for instance, your average copper mine right now in the top 60 is the average forecast life is 77 years, which is probably still conservative. But most of them don't start out with mine plans of more than 20, 30 years. So typically we'll pay for some version of that 2030, and we're not going to buy at net asset value either, because these things aren't producing yet. So you're buying, I think, at some reasonable fraction of that net asset value. And kind of what you're not paying for and what's not captured in there is obviously the capacity expansions, which happen almost automatically with things like that, and the mine life, and obviously the commodity prices as well. Because kind of you're valuing these things based on, say, copper staying at $3.325 through, right now our corporate model already runs out to 2068. That's how long we're forecasting revenues for in some of our stuff. Chances are copper is not going to stay at $3.325 through 2068. I think if you just look at the history of commodity prices, especially given a strategic role. So I think what you buy with Nova really is a very, what's the best way to say it? I would say it's a very easy way to own the upside of the most strategic deposits that the world is going to need. And then you can sort of run your numbers on that and figure out what's reasonable. But if you look at the history of kind of how these things have functioned before at similar mines, I think there's going to be a multiple of cash flows that relative to whatever is being forecast today. And the company has no capital commitments. It's not as if we have to go build the mines ourselves. We've bet basically on the world's best mining companies to do that. So it's really, I think, from a risk perspective, as good a situation as you can have, because there's no more risk to be taken in terms of capital commitment. At this point, you've bet on the deposit quality and the operator quality, and you just let it happen. And then obviously we're going to be adding more selectively to the portfolio to make sure it's even stronger.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah. And, just because I always like to touch on the people, I want to wrap up by just mentioning what initially turned my head to Nova was the shareholder base. Alex has attracted capital from some of the smartest people in the business, from Adrian Day, Peter Schiff, E.B. Tucker, Doug Casey. It's quite a rock star lineup of early shareholders. That's what I pay the most attention to, is who's in the deal, either as a CEO, as a director, or as a shareholder. That's the first step of my diligence every single time. Alex, it's been awesome having you back on and getting an update from you. I'd like to do it again soon.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you, Jay.